Hello, I'm Gail.
Hello, I'm Catherine, and today we are delighted to bring to you our advocate for women aging, Lydia Denworth. She's a science journalist who contributes regularly to Scientific American, and I just need to show this. She was in the special issue in winter 2020, writing about Is There a Female Brain? She contributes regularly to Psychology Today. Her work also appears in the Atlantic, Newsweek, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time, and numerous other publications. But today, we want to focus on her book of 2020, which is called, I have to show this also, Friendship, the Evolution, Biology, and Extraordinary Power of Life's Fundamental Bond. And we're especially interested to hear about the value of friendship for women across the ages and as we age. So welcome, Lydia.
Hi, it's great to be here with you both.
Thank you.
Happy to have you.
So I first heard about your work, Lydia, when I listened to a webinar that you offered through the Transition Network National. And I called Gail immediately and said, we have to talk with her. This is the most wonderful work ever. And then I purchased your book, and I'm just very enthralled with it. So why don't we just start, though, by telling us what is life as a science journalist?
Well, right now we're recording this in the time of the coronavirus pandemic. So life as a science journalist is fairly busy. There's a lot to do. But generally, I feel really fortunate to get to do this work. I feel like I am telling one of the really important stories in the world, which is science in general. I mean, it is a story, but it's what we know about the world so far. There's a beginning, a middle, and then never an end, because it's always moving forward. And I feel like it's important, and my job is to both translate it for the wider world, but also to bring a skeptical eye, or to try to be kind of a curator and of what's good work out there, and what's important, and also what's fun. And I've really enjoyed also getting to know. I've made friends with quite a lot of scientists, and they're really interesting people and they're very passionate about their work. So that's always nice people to be with.
I can imagine. Well, we're so curious. What prompted you to choose friendship as a topic of a worthy investigation?
Well, if you're going to write a book about anything, you really need to be willing to spend a couple of years wrestling with the topic. And friendship certainly felt like something that would be interesting, would sustain my interest. It felt important to me. So I'm at a sort of transition point in life in my early 50s, where getting to the mid 50s, I guess, where my kids are growing up and out, and I'm losing my mother, and it's a transition and a moment, I think, as often is the case in life, when we are in transition points where we think about the people in our lives and how we're going to be spending our time and with whom. And so maybe I was primed to be particularly interested in friendship, but I think one of the appeals of the subject for me was also that it's something that's relevant to every single person on the globe at every point in their lives. And the other really big thing was that it was about 5 years ago when I first got this idea, and I was at a conference listening to scientists talk about what they were working on and what they thought was interesting. And this kept coming up, this idea that there was a biology and an evolution to friendship. I mean, this was part of sort of the growing interest in studying social behavior in general. But the idea that friendship in particular would be treated so seriously and had this other aspect to it was really fascinated me. I felt like we think we know all there is to know about friendship. It's so familiar. It's so sort of something we take for granted. It seemed like maybe there was an opportunity to reveal that there was something new to understand.
We all can relate to the emotional aspect of friendship and how it adds value to our lives in that way. But you talk about how it affects us in many ways. And again, can you kind of enlighten us about that?
Sure. I mean, the headlines from the book are, I'd say that the two really big headlines are, one is that that friendship is as important for our health as diet and exercise. And it should be right up there with those two things. It should be something that we are thinking about in that context. And the other piece of it is that for a long time we've appreciated for thousands of years that friendship is pleasurable, that it feels important and valuable, but we've always thought it was part of human culture, a byproduct really of language and civilization. And while there are definitely cultural elements to friendship or layers to friendship, it turns out that at its core, it's part of our evolutionary story. It's not just humans, but other species as well. So there are real evolutionary advantages to being good at making and maintaining friends. There's been a survival of the friendliest, essentially. Yes.
What other species do we share this with?
Most obviously, a lot of the non-human primates, so monkeys and apes, like rhesus macaques and baboons, chimpanzees. Different monkeys and apes have different kinds of societies, so they don't all work exactly the same way. But it has been shown so the most fundamental work that was sort of most directly relevant to humans was in baboons, where they found that the baboons with the strongest positive bonds lived the longest and had more and healthier babies. And that's about as good as you can do in evolutionary terms, right? Longevity and reproductive success is what we're all after, and getting your genes on into the next generation. And the thing that was striking was that baboons are a very hierarchical society. They live in troops where, there's a pecking order. And the scientists who were watching them really thought that dominance hierarchy probably was the most important factor. And what was so striking to them was that the friendships, which they did start to call it among the baboons, these strong bonds among the baboons, was more important when it came to these evolutionary outcomes they were measuring. And so, of course, in humans, it looks a little different. I mean, not everybody has children and things like that, and that's fine. But the point of natural selection is that we're sort of looking to do things that perpetuate our genes, that allow us to live longer, and that keep us healthier, right? And so it's not just about living a long time, but living a happy and healthy life. And it turns out that friendship does the same thing in humans.
Aren't penguins also in that category?
I didn't come across research on penguins, but that doesn't mean that they're not. I mean, because what is true is that it's remarkable how many species show some elements of this kind of social connection, and this way of kind of bonding together. But what the many species, other species, do spend most of their time with their relatives, with their biological relatives. But what's interesting is that in several species, they've shown that it's the exception that proves the rule, kind of, that it does not have to be your relatives to get the benefits, right? That if you're a baboon, say, who lost your relatives to a lion, and you have other strong relationships in your troop, you're good. You're going to be okay. I hope that's true for the penguins too. I think in the case of the penguins, there's a reverse. Don't the males look after the eggs, and then the females go out and hunt? Anyway, I'll have to investigate the penguins.
The interesting thing about friendship to me has always been that women and men do friendship differently. What can you say about that?
Well, so what's interesting, you're right, and there are certainly stereotypes about that. So the way I usually sum it up is that stereotype is that women do friendship face to face, meaning we talk to each other a lot, and men do it side by side. meaning that they do things together. They play sports or watch sports, or they sit on bar stools next to each other, or they engage in projects together. And there's truth to both of those things. Women are much more likely to think of their time with their friends as time of sitting and talking and catching up. But it is also true that a lot of recent research found that the similarities between the way men and women feel about friendship are much greater than the differences, which I think is the kind of intriguing part of the story. You know, it's and that men value friendship just as much as women. Maybe they do it differently. I think culturally, this is a case where culture comes in. Men in our culture, certainly in the West, have not really been always encouraged to develop friendship, or, you know, they're supposed to be strong and individualistic and not to need to talk about their emotions. Or if they get married, they kind of put all their emotional eggs in that basket. And there was a Saturday Night Live skit recently where the comedian who did the monologue was making a joke about how his father, who I guess was around 70, doesn't have friends. He has his wife's friends' husbands to hang out with, you know. And I'm sure there's some truth to that being how people do live their lives in some cases. But I have 3 sons and a husband, and all of them have very strong friendships and spend plenty of time with their friends and talk to their friends about how they feel about things, maybe not the same way I do. But so I'm sort of interested in debunking a little bit the idea that men at least are, and this may not be what you were saying, Gail, but I think culturally we have the idea that they're kind of duds at friendship, and I don't think that's entirely fair.
Well, not duds at friendship.
Yeah, but women have a special power. It's true. I mean, we have really appreciated how important friendship is in the current cultural moment, and we know that, we appreciate it, we talk about it, and women do seem to make more of an effort to maintain their friendships outside of marriage, to maintain, to rely on friends for different things. And so we seem to have got the memo, I guess.
What does it do for us physiologically?
Physiologically? Yeah, this one of the things I think is so fascinating is that when I said it's as important for our health as diet and exercise, what I'm referring to is the fact that if you take loneliness on the one hand and friendship on the other as 2 sides of this question of social, like basically a measure of how socially integrated and connected you feel, all of those things, for good in the case of friendship or for ill in the case of loneliness, have been shown to affect your cardiovascular functioning, your immune system, so how resilient or susceptible you are to inflammation or viruses, quite relevant today. It affects your cognitive health, so your risk of dementia, your mental health, your risk of depression, your stress responses, your quality of sleep, and even the rate at which your cells age. So there's a little cap on the end of your cells that gets shorter over time, and it's shorter in lonelier people than it is in people who feel more connected. So they're literally biologically aging faster if they feel less connected.
Does it make a difference in terms of quality or quantity?
It does.
Friendship.
Quality matters most. So quantity is not unimportant, but quality matters most. And really the biggest step, I mean, if you're going to ask me, is there a magic number of friends you have to have? I'm going to say it's 1, actually. The step change, the difference between 0 and 1 is the greatest difference, but of course it's better to have more than 1 friend because you kind of need a bench, I think. But if you have a variety of friends, that gives you other benefits. It obviously exposes you to more viewpoints, and that's very important. And from a health perspective, it does seem to provide some more resilience or more immunity to common diseases and colds and things like that. But what's really interesting is that it's clear that quality matters most when it comes to these questions of how it affects us. And we don't know, by the way, all of the science for exactly how all those things that I listed, how it works. We know some of it. When I won't get into the details because it can get pretty nerdy, but but that's kind of where the science is now, is trying to figure out, what scientists call the mechanism, like what's happening in the body, how does it get under the skin, how can a relationship that exists here outside of the body entirely get inside under the skin and change the way your cells work, the way your genes are expressed. And it does. We don't know exactly how it does that, but we know that it does.
So quality of friendship, is that as each person defines it, or are there some markers?
No, yes, there are some markers. So what's interesting is that one reason why friendship, why scientists like evolutionary biologists, and they didn't study friendship for a long time, was because they had trouble defining it. It felt kind of squishy and a little unscholarly to them then, but one of the advantages of doing this work in other species is that it allowed them to strip out a lot of the complex variables that come with human life, right? And to sort of get down to, what does that strong positive bond have to look like? And they found that it included 3 fundamental things. Those bonds were long-lasting, they're positive, and they're cooperative. So, and then in humans, an anthropologist went out and sort of looked at friendships across cultures, many, many, many cultures all over the world, and found surprisingly similar, or maybe not surprisingly, found strikingly similar themes, that friendships made people feel good. Most often they were described as making people feel good, and that friends were there when you needed them, especially in a time of crisis, which is the cooperative piece of what's going on in the baboons, say. I mean, really, friendship fundamentally is about being there for each other when we need each other. And we get all the benefits, the feeling good and the rewards in our brains, kind of makes us come back for more and wants us, it helps us to develop the intimacy in the relationship. And that is so that then when we need that person, they're there for us. So really the payoff is meant to be the being there in a crisis. And so for a baboon, that looks like, helping protect you from the predators or helping you find food in the savannah. And in humans, it looks like other things, but it's the figurative lions. Our friends are there to help us.
I asked my 30-year-old daughter the other day what friendship means to her, and she said, well, it means they got my back.
Yes, there you go. There you
right?
go. She said it much more succinctly than I did.
I have a book for you.
And it also saves us from spending time in the psychologist chair.
This is true. It's actually while I was working on my book, one of my friends gave me a pair of socks that said, "Friends are therapists you can drink with." But yes, that's probably true. Have a glass of wine, talk it out, and it feels better.
Yeah. Are you going to continue to dig into this area of friendship, or are you moving on to other areas?
I'm not sure. Right now, I am doing a lot of journalism. I'm not working on a new book, but a lot of that journalism does kind of is related to this idea of the importance of our social lives and our, on our mental health and things like that. I'm sort of spinning in, related directions, but we'll see. I do find it really interesting, and I feel like there's still a lot to say and do. So probably.
I'm curious, Lydia, when you chose journalism as a career.
Oh, all the way back. I always wanted to be a writer, and I was on the newspaper in high school and in college. I started a magazine with peers in college, but I was always interested in journalism and nonfiction, and I never wanted to write the great American novel or anything. I just always wanted to do this. The real switch for me was the science piece, because that only came kind of halfway through my career, and I would not have predicted it because that was not what I studied or was interested in. But I got to it by being interested in things like children's health and education, and my first book ended up having a scientist as one of the protagonists, and I I had to suddenly read all this complicated science and then write about it. And I found that I was better at that than I imagined I'd be, and that it felt important and interesting. And so I've kind of never looked back, and am doing this now. But the journalism piece, I've been a journalist for 30 years and a science writer for more like 15.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So what else would you like us and our listeners to understand about friendship?
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about this friendship specifically when you're over 70 or in the later stages of life. And, there's really good news and there's a little bad news. The good news is that you can make friends at every stage of life, even though some people seem to find it harder in adulthood. I think in the later stages of adulthood, though, maybe it gets a little easier because people have a little more time again, at least on that front. If you're not, if you are, your family's grown and you have maybe less work to do in a career, it can be easier because time is truly a big piece of friendship. It's just a fundamental part of it. But it's also, and one of the lovely things is that the epidemiology on this that looks at social relationships and health found that over 65, friends were the most important kind of relationship there was, and they took the place of a spouse, and which is great news if you lose your spouse or you're not married, and you might be afraid of going into the later decades alone, but actually friends really do seem to be able to be there to sort of fill that space. It works well, and it shows up in big epidemiological studies of thousands of people. The friends are powerful. So that is the great news. The other thing I think is interesting is that, we worry a lot about loneliness in older people. Mm-hmm. And that's a legitimate worry, mainly because we know how bad for us loneliness is now. But one of the things that my research or that I discovered is that even if people have smaller social circles when they're older, it's often intentional. I don't know if that's your experience, but it comes from this idea that we focus more on the people we actually really like and want to be with, which speaks to that idea of quality mattering most. So maybe people have figured that out intuitively and said, I just don't have time for the people who are demanding and draining, and I'm going to hang out with the people I really care about. So I think that's great, and that's something to sort of aspire to. The bad news that I alluded to is that some of the research on where they followed people over the course of their lives has revealed that the people who are happiest and healthiest, in this case the study was looking at when you were 80 years old, how happy and healthy were you? And what they found was that that what affected that most was the satisfaction you had with your relationships back when you were 50. So in the middle of life, which is at a point in time when a lot of people were not necessarily putting all their effort into friendship. They might have been more likely to be putting their effort into careers or raising families or things like that. And so, there will be damage done if you didn't work on your friendships the whole time, but it's totally recoverable, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That, there's part of the story that says, like, don't wait until you're over 65 to really focus on friends. If you did, however, the really good news is that the people are out there and that there's a lot of benefit to be had.
So is that about retaining friendships from when you were in your 50s, or that you have a lot of practice at being a good friend and having friends?
I think it's the latter. Of course, it could be both. And, lucky you if you do still have wonderful, sustaining relationships over the decades. And many people do. And I did say that part of friendship, part of being a good friend, and the definition of friendship is that it's a long-lasting relationship. But what I interpret that as is that it means being a steady, reliable presence in someone's life. It does not mean that you have to have known them for 40 years or 50 years or, and people come in, we lose people, obviously people pass away or they move or, that things happen. And I mean, in my mother's case, very sadly, she's got very severe Alzheimer's. And so her friends feel that loss hugely, because they thought they were all going to grow old together. And, and that has not been so easy to do with her. But other people can fill that void. The important thing is that you then have to work a little, though. If those are newer relationships, you have to recognize that it can take some time to develop that intimacy. And so you need to put in the time, and you need to sort of be recognizing that's worth prioritizing, and that there is a payoff to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Do
a
you
lot of sense.
find that at different stages of people's lives, their friendships wane and grow, and different types of friendships they form?
It does seem that the middle of life, when people in theory are busiest, is when they have the hardest time with friendship. Most people. There are, of course, all of this, we haven't really talked about how people's personal inclinations. So some people are shyer, or some people are very content with just a sort of quieter social life, interacting with one or two people at a time. And other people have sort of been making relationships everywhere they went for their whole lives, and kind of are the, joiners, or throwing parties, and it's all good as long as whatever relationships you have make you feel connected and sustained. It does seem to be true that people focus more again on friendship as they get older. And so that's great. I guess my message is less for your audience and more for the people who are still in their 40s or 50s is don't forget that this is a muscle you need to keep working, and that you will be better off when you're older if you've thought about it the whole way through.
Yeah, really important. And we do have listeners who are
good. Okay.
younger and certainly want to reach across the generation.
Yes, indeed. And reaching across friendships across generations are, of course, a wonderful thing. We do often tend to be drawn to people who are like us, and age is one of the ways that that's true, partly just because it provides a shortcut. You've been through a lot of the same things you have, and you tend to have the same kinds of, issues in your life to deal with now. But I think one of the wonders of adulthood is how the differences in age can kind of melt away. And because shared interests and shared worldview and things like that matter a lot, and that doesn't matter how old you are.
Right.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
Gail, did you want to say
No,
something?
I just wanted to say thank you very much. This was just a wonderful conversation, Lydia, and I think that the path you have chosen suits you very well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate so much you're talking with us, and we'll be delighted to make your book and other work known through our networks as well.
Great. Well, I very much appreciate that, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right.